Welcome, everyone, to another exciting adventure in marketing with me. Mark Schaefer and Jay Acunzo is here today. And I'm struggling with a little bit of a cold today, but I'm energized seeing Jay over the Zoom interface here today. And before we get going, because I know we're gonna get on a roll for this one. I want to remind everyone that we are sponsored by Brevo. Brevo is just such a great company to help businesses successfully navigate their digital presence. It's the perfect growth tool for marketers, small businesses, and sales teams looking to build with a consolidated marketing and CRM toolbox. And it's a great value. It's so easy to use. Try it out for free. Go to www.brevo.com/marketingcompanion and you get a free trial. And if you want to sign up, put in companion as a promo code. You'll get 50% off the business plan. So, Jay, today we're going to talk about signature stories. This is such an important topic for marketers, for businesses, for especially for speakers. And you've actually written a little bit about this recently. I think that's what prompted me to think about this. So, what we're going to do today, I think this is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to tell a couple stories. So, Jay is going to start. He is going to talk about one of his signature stories that he uses in his talks, and then kind of we'll discuss like what makes it great. What are some of the aspects of this story that make it effective? And then I'm going to tell one of my favorite stories. It's one of the most unique stories that I've ever told on stage. And I'll never forget it because the first time I told it, the audience gasped. So we'll leave you with that. So that's coming up. So Jay, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about your story. Tell us the story, and let's talk about why it worked for you.
Yeah, I'll set it up for you. So, and hey, Mark, welcome back from Italy, by the
Yeah.
way. Super
Thanks.
jealous. And because you're coming back from Italy, I have a story that's somewhat tangentially related to
Oh,
Italy that I brought
oh,
for you today.
good. Ciao.
I,
Ciao.
yeah, really, everything's aligning here, right? Like, there's nothing goes to waste in this production. Everything is relevant to everything. W- I'm hosting this new show. It's about 11 or 12 episodes in. When your new book comes out, I'll have you on the show called How Stories Happen. And what you find is, I go back to this awesome quote by Ira Glass, which is great stories happen to those who can tell them. And he is not saying that magically the only things that strike human beings worthy of sharing as stories only happen to to the people that can tell stories. Like he means it's a craft. Like you don't experience stories, you experience your life or other people's lives through conversation, through interviews, whatever. Then you put your butt in the chair and you craft that stuff into stories. It's material that you actually use to create something. You create the story. You don't just convey a transcript of your life, right? And so people go, "Oh, I don't have good stories to tell, or I'm not a good storyteller," blah, 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 blah. Well, on How Stories Happen, every expert or every episode, an expert dissects a single story piece by piece. And that's what you learn. You learn like it didn't start out as a story. It started out as like a memory, a moment, a confused little feeling, a frustrated feeling, whatever. And it's built. And I love the building process of this stuff. And it just makes it feel so much more attainable because it's not like, oh, I have to build $1 billion company to have a good story, or I need 30 years of experience to be a storyteller in my space. So, yeah, storytelling elevates you everywhere you go. And it's not something that's only for a choice few, which I really love. So, that's just like that's not even framing the story I'm here to tell. That's just framing my view on storytelling. It's a craft.
Well, let's get into it. I want to hear the story, buddy.
All right, let's hear it. I want to take you to a place where all good things happen, including all good realizations about business and marketing. It's a pizza place. So I grew up about 10 minutes outside of New Haven, Connecticut, on the shore of Connecticut, which is a state I lovingly refer to as New Yorkachusetts, because there is no real identity unless you're from there. However, one of the pieces that could form Connecticut's identity is New Haven style pizza, because this stuff is ranked nationally across the US, even globally, every single year. And on a tiny little block, on a tiny little street in New Haven, in Worcester Street, is a tiny little pizza place called Sally's. Pizza or Sally's A Beats. Now, 2 blocks down the street from Sally's is their fiercest rival, Pepe's, Frank Pepe's. Both Sally's and Pepe's are ranked nationally every year. Both Sally's and Pepe's have famous clientele photos hanging on the walls with their autographs. And both Sally's and Pepe's have fierce, passionate fans who hate the other fan base. It's like the Yankees and Red Sox of New Haven pizza. And my family is a Sally's family and always has been. And for years as a kid, we would always get the same waiter whose name was Lorenzo. Big burly 6'4" guy. He would wear shorts in the dead of winter. He would saunter around this little hole in the wall joint, like being sarcastic to his regulars, pissing off the people who had come for the first time, wondering why he wasn't the best servant possible. Because that's Sally's. If you know, you know. And I knew Lorenzo. And when I was about 12 years old, I said something very sarcastic to him. And what he revealed to me changed my perspective on our work forever. I said, "Hey, Lorenzo, we've been coming to Sally since I was a little kid. My best friend in the world loves Pepe's. They're like just down the street. You both serve pizza. How you any different?" And he could have crushed me. But instead, he said, uh, well,
Ah,
we both have access to the same cheese. We both have access to the same sauce. We both have access to the same toppings. But the secret, he said, is the starter. Now, if you don't know, the starter is a very simple mixture of flour and water that forms the basis for making great dough. You sort of dip into it when you start the next batch of dough. There are 2 ways to affect your starter: exposure and time. So you can expose it to different levels of light, different temperatures in your back room somewhere, different containers you can store your starter in. You can expose it. Some people put little drops of like grape juice in it, and then it takes time to ferment. Now, for someone like Sally's, and they started in the 1930s, the starter is so important that you work the same starter for decades. I think it's like 1938 when they started working theirs over at Sally's Pizza. Some people value it so much that it's like a pet that lives with them. They give it a nickname. Now, I don't have a starter, but if I ever did, I already have my nickname. Ready? The
Mark,
Yeasty Boys. The Yeasty
Yeasty
Boys.
Boys.
Yep. Yep.
Now, I
Yep.
always favor Mark. Mark is such a strong name for dough.
Get out of my story. What are you doing? That's not what we agreed upon here. Get out. What are you
Sorry,
doing?
I
This is
will
not a
exit.
voice
I will
included in the
exit.
story.
Sorry, totally
I'll take you to
inappropriate.
Sally's another time,
I
Mark.
threw you off.
So, what Lorenzo made clear to me that day was, as a result of all the things your starter is exposed to and all the time it takes to ferment, no 2 starters can make the same dough. And that's how Sally's, sitting not 2 blocks down the street from its biggest competitor in the world, can be fundamentally different and I think better, or better than better would be my favorite, compared to a competitor that's that close with access to the same commodity toppings. In this world of AI driven everything, I think human beings have their own LLM. If AI has large language models, then people have little life moments. As a result of everything that you have been exposed to and all the time it's taken you to become who you are the starter in your work. And no 2 starters can make the same dough. So, yes, you have access to the same technologies. You have access to the same experts. You have access to the same, maybe even industry publications, tools, and knowledge bases as everybody else you compete with. And the only thing remaining that truly separates you is you. And we're just not drawing on our starter enough. That to me is the difference between people in this work who think it's about content and people who think it's about connection. Wherever you go, whatever you do, draw upon the things that make you more insightful and more personal than other people. If you want to do higher impact work, stop creating content and learn to create connection. Remember that you are the starter.
Woohoo! Now, if you could just imagine, Jay, thousands of people around the world listening to this podcast are clapping for you now. They're clapping for you in your head. That's really a wonderful story.
I feel like
And
a guest on my show now where I'm like, I was a little clunky. I don't know. I usually give it on a stage or in a webinar or,
yeah.
in a podcast that's more produced or something.
So, so I'd like to ask you, I mean, this is the way things sort of happened to me, and I have a hunch this it happened to you too. Like you were working on a speech, you're working on some content,
Yeah.
you kind of went back in your memory banks, and all of a sudden it just clicked. Like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
There was that time when I was 12 years old. That's a really interesting story. It would really work here. Is that how it worked for you?
Yeah, well, closing, ending anything, any experience, written, spoken, or otherwise, like it's so hard, right? And yet people form their memories based on the first and last moments of something. So you know, and you could be a speaker and think this way, or a communicator in any way, any medium. Like you know, you have to deliver at the end, and most people drop the momentum. So, like for a speech, I was always thinking, what's my closer? What's my closing story? And
Yeah,
if it's an actual talk that you've been with me for 45 minutes, I'll intersperse that with more lessons that evoke the earlier moments of the talk, right?
yeah,
I didn't do that here because I didn't present that material, but
yeah,
so I knew like I needed a good closer.
yeah,
I think this is not supposed to introduce anything brand new because that's confusing to people. It's got to tie it up somehow while sending you off. Like I always think about the phrase exit velocity. If I'm ending a speech, if I'm ending an episode of my podcast, like people really stink at those two things, and the ending of a LinkedIn post even. Like I need to send you away from me
yeah,
having achieved exit velocity so you feel like you can rocket to orbit somehow. And so I think a story does that, but also a story that like takes you outside of your echo chamber, that has like a human protagonist. In this case it's me, and I guess Lorenzo's the secondary character. It like a story allows the storyteller to clear away head trash so that your thinking and expertise can come in behind it and they're open to new possibilities. And this is me being like, go bet on yourself. Go do things that look like not the best practice, but the right practice for you, the right approach for you. Like, I am a believer that if you're a smart expert, you've been commodified. Like, expertise is foundational, but it's found everywhere. So, how do I get you to think more like a storyteller or a thought leader or just any really adept and inspiring communicator, not just an expert? Um, and it pains me to even say just an expert. Like expertise matters so much, but it's getting drowned out today. So yeah, all these things like this is hard for people to embrace. So can I make it small? And to your point, it's like, yeah, now you start raiding the closets of your mind of like, yeah, that's kind of a cool thing I experienced in like a throwaway little life moment, like an LLM. Let me
yeah.
like see what I can, how I can then build it, right? So it's like you got the thread, then you pull it, and it's in the pulling, you're like in the draft mode of like, I don't know if this works, or how I got to tell it to Mark, or I got to tell it on a stage here or whatever. Like I've
Uh,
probably done that story, I don't know, 1,000 times in two different or 2 dozen different ways.
right, right, right. I find that too. That once you find a story that hits, there are usually multiple ways you can use it. And well, I thank you for that story, and I thank you for your explanation. I mean, there's so much richness to unpack there. Another thing I like about this, Jay, is that it wasn't someone else's story.
Mm,
It was you, right? So you are guaranteed of creating something memorable and original because no one's ever heard that story before because they couldn't, because it
right.
comes from you. And I think, I mean, in my stories, I have occasionally like told a case study that maybe happened to someone else, but I love the emotion. I also love the point you make about the emotional trajectory of your content.
Yeah.
You know, and in my books, in my speeches, I always have this positive ending, right? It kind of leads to this, you know, positive, upbeat ending, and that's something that I teach in my I teach a class on public speaking as well, and we talk about you got to set the business case,
Yeah.
and then you can, and then I do exactly, or I teach exactly as you're saying, Jay, is like, all right, you think of what are the points you want to make. Now, how do we decorate those points? How do we illustrate those points?
Yeah. That's
With
beautiful.
stories from our data banks, right?
Right. Right.
I just love this that you kind of blew out this moment from your childhood as a teachable moment. That's really a
Yeah.
love story, yeah.
You're kind of like in the business at the end of putting a gentle hand, maybe a firm hand on their shoulder and saying like, "Hey, remember," because like we just spent time together, whether it is a speech or another type of experience, and you're like, "You're gonna leave me now." Like, please remember this. And a very straight ahead and sometimes flat way to do that is you retrace the beats of whatever it was that you wrote or spoke to them, right? You're like, okay, so we want to do this thing and achieve this goal. We're doing it this way, and that's broken. Here are some steps to be better, and that's how you achieve the goal. Like that's not a terrible way to end, but it doesn't really rev people up and give them that energy. You know, my favorite storytellers, they reach through the screen, they reach through, you know, the ether, and they kind of like tap you on the heart and tap you in the chest and go like, remember this part. Like that's why you go back to your work. And when the head trash starts getting dumped in your head again, you still cling to that idea and it comes back and serves you. Is like you're giving them that little, I don't know, moment together at the end where you're just like, hey, remember. And that alone is not enough. It's you make the case to your point, and now that we're aligned, I can send you away with this as like a handhold. And to me, that's the story.
Well, the final comment I'll make about your story is that it was memorable, and one of the reasons it was memorable is because there were no facts or figures or statistics. So people, I mean, I'm sure you've had this experience like I have, where people will come up to you even a year later or a couple years later and say, "Oh, Jay, the pizza story. Yeah, I love the
Yes.
pizza story.
Yes.
I've told that to my family. I've told that to my coworkers." People aren't going to remember a Pareto diagram or a pie chart, but they're going to remember the pizza. And so for me, and we'll get into my story now, it's soap.
Let's hear it.
So there are a couple of things that are remarkable for me about this story and memorable about this story for me. And the first was that this was a story I first introduced when I created my speech to support a book I wrote called Marketing Rebellion. Marketing Rebellion was a wake-up call. The idea was we were many people are in a marketing trench. They just start doing something a certain way and they just keep doing it year after year without looking up and seeing how the world really is, how the world really works. And so I wanted a story to kind of kick off that point. Now, the reason I'll never forget this is because I debuted this speech as the opening keynote speaker at the National Speakers Association, which is the dumbest place in the world to debut a speech because you got all these professional speakers out in the audience, right? But it was the right speech at the right time, so I decided to do it. So I started off the speech saying, kind of illustrating the business case that I wanted to present. And I said, I want to start with a story. Like all good business stories, this one begins with soap. Not just any soap, but the most famous soap in the world, Ivory soap. Now, Ivory has been produced and marketed by Procter and Gamble for more than 100 years. It was the first soap ever cut into bars, individually wrapped and marketed to consumers. During the 1960s, they advertised so heavily on daytime television that time slot became known as the soap operas because it was sponsored by soap. And Ivory soap was the only soap my mother trusted on my precious little bum at bath time because she saw it on television. And that's how she learned what to know, what to trust. Ivory was so successful that in the 1960s, they had 50% market share of the US soap market, almost an unbelievable success story. Well, a few years ago, I was reading in the Wall Street Journal how Ivory's market share had declined to less than 3%. In fact, many of the brands built by advertising were in a precipitous decline. And I just couldn't figure out why. We still need soap. It's not being replaced by OpenAI, by ChatGPT. Soap isn't being replaced by solar energy. How could they blow it? This is Procter and Gamble, the biggest marketing company, the most successful marketing company in the world with the best marketers and the best agencies. How could they blow it? Well, I got my answer one night when I was visiting a friend for dinner. And we had a beautiful dinner together. And after the dinner, I went into the bathroom. And there, sitting on the counter, was a bar of soap from the Knoxville Soap Company, cucumber and grit soap. So I went back out in the living room. And the lady who cooked me dinner that night, I said, I have a question for you. Can you please come into the bathroom with me? She got a strange look on her face, but she obliged me. So I pointed at this soap and I said, I want to know why you bought this soap. Procter and Gamble has been advertising to you your whole life. Why didn't you buy Ivory or Dial or Irish Spring? Why do you love this brand? She thought for a moment. She said, I don't know if I love this brand. but I love the hands that made it. And when I said that phrase for the first time, there was literally a gasp in the audience. And I thought I was imagining it because I've never had a response like that to anything I've said in a speech. Well, I had some friends sitting in the front row, and after the speech was over, they came up to me and they said, "Yes." Everybody was this like so stunned by this gripping comment. There literally was a gasp in the audience. Well, then I go on with the story and say that this young woman said that she doesn't really buy the soap because it's less expensive or because it smells better or because it cleans better. She buys it because of the family that makes it. They're involved in the community. They treat their employees really well. They give back to the community. They teach classes. They're trying to create a sustainable product and use local ingredients. And she went on and on and on. And she was so excited about it that it made me want to go buy it. And she went on to say, Mark, you mentioned advertising. I can't remember the last time I saw an ad. I consume more television than I've ever watched before, but it's on Netflix and it's on Amazon Prime, and I never see ads. And listen to Spotify all day long, and I don't hear ads. And I listen to audiobooks, and I don't hear ads. I would say in the last 5 years, my advertising consumption has gone down by 95%. So this is it's a true story. This insight really happened to me,
Yeah.
so I can use that concept really to introduce a lot of different ideas. Obviously, the theme of marketing rebellion is you got to wake up and see how the world is really working today. And if you're counting on radio ads and TV ads, I mean, those days are over. But
Yeah.
it also talks about community. It addresses this idea of word of mouth marketing, right? There's no marketing plan behind this. It's two people talking to each other, and that's the most effective marketing that there is.
Yeah.
So that is the story, and that's a story I've worked into different speeches um, to illustrate different points. And like people will come up to me and say, "Oh yeah, the soap story. Tell my friend the soap story." And so that one's worked out really well for
Yeah.
me.
And we've been talking about it as through the lens of speakers, but like obviously you could write that story. You could show up as a guest in a video series or a podcast as the guest, and you could use that story. Like signature stories have this infinite use case in that I think the first is you learn how to sign your name. That's what makes it a signature. It is not that you tell the story everywhere or repeatedly. It's that you know how to get your creative fingerprints all over it. What makes that marks, like if I were to tell that story, it would be different. Like I would probably I'm a sucker for those LLM things, the little life moments. Like I would probably go into like what was your mom like, and like you using the soap. Like I would probably anchor it to that a little bit more. Whereas you're fascinated by like marketing as an industry and like larger brands and all these things. Like you signed your name to that story, and so like in my back catalog of signature stories, I have mostly stories about others, but I've found a way to sign my name to it. Same with your books, same with your speeches, same with your writing,
Yeah.
same with your guest
Mhm.
appearances. So like I think one of the things that allowed me to see was as you were saying it, what questions came up about how I would tell it as different than you, right? Like
Yeah.
making
Hmm.
your mom more of a character or something like that, or then you fast forward and you grew up and you now buy that soap, and you also grew up to become a marketer, and you're like, this advertising has clearly affected me, and then wham, this pivot into why did they have this random soap over here, right? Like there's so many ways you could take the material or raw ingredients of that story, hand it to another communicator, and see that like the mark is now missing, right? And I think that's a huge issue with a lot of people who communicate. They're like, I'm a smart email marketer and I'm here to teach you how to be a better email marketer. And I'm like, great, get in line. Can you illuminate this stuff to me and make it stick in a
Yeah.
way that like only comes from you? And I think that's what your story is able to do.
Well, I've heard you speak a few times, and I wonder if this crosses your mind as it does for me. So let's use the soap story as an example where you think, okay, there's this little thing, this little epiphany for me,
Yeah.
and you think, is that really a good enough story to tell? It's just this little thing that happened in my life.
Yeah.
Does it take for you a certain amount of courage to say, yeah, that is a good story. I think it's gonna, it's gonna work,
Yep.
or is it just more even flowing for you?
This is why I think it matters that you have some place, the general you, not you, Mark, because I know you have this, like a blog or a newsletter or a podcast or a journal where you, on a daily, hopefully, basis, if not just weekly, you're just creating stuff to like work through and sharpen your thinking. Because I think my answer is different. If you're like, Jay, in your head, can you decide whether or not that's a story worth telling? Hard no. And I'm
Yeah,
someone who
yeah,
allegedly does this professionally, right?
uh-huh.
I have to write it out. I have to tell the story to figure out, is this a story worth telling? Like I have to bring it with me. So like I'll use my newsletter and then judge how I felt. I got through it. How do I tell it better the next time? Or so and so responded and they are someone I consider a peer, or five people said something with passion even if I don't know who they are. Like I think on episode 1 of How Stories Happen, I had the great Andrew Davis, your friend and mine.
Oh, yeah.
And he said the only way to figure out a story is to tell it. And I subscribe to that belief.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and I remember, one of the reasons this was remarkable is because, my speeches are generally iterative, where you try
Yeah.
it out and see how things go, and maybe, if people laugh, okay, we'll keep it in if they laugh in the right places. But that speech was the only speech I've ever done where I really hit it out of the park on the first try.
Mm.
I mean, after I did that speech, even for years, it's still basically the same speech, the stories that I told. And I think I've been doing this long enough, Jay, that I do have a sense of what stories will stick.
I think you get that second that
You
intuition about it.
you
Yeah.
kinda get, it's like the 10,000 hours, right? I mean, I've been blogging for 10,000 hours, I've done speaking for 10,000 hours, and you kinda get that sense where, yeah, I know, like, when I do a blog post that I'm particularly excited about, it's like, I can't wait for people to see
Yeah.
this. They're really gonna, love this story. This is
I
gonna
mean, I
ignite
love
some
that for you. My
conversation.
hit rate on that, I don't know. I like question it. Maybe down the middle, 50-50. It's a coin like I get so excited about certain things. Let me backtrack.
Yeah,
It's not that I don't know if the story is worth it or gonna hit. It's that
yeah,
I don't know how to construct it so it does. I'm like, that
yeah,
story is inescapably going to connect with people, but I haven't been able to figure out like how they need to hear it and access it.
yeah,
Right? That's how I feel. It's an instant yes, but then the execution, I'm like, I don't know how to ensure that they receive it the way that I have because I experienced it and they haven't. Or
yeah.
I interviewed Mark on my podcast and now I'm telling it on a stage 6 months later or something about Mark's story.
So do you create like I do where you create sort of the the bones of the speech, the outline of the speech, and then try to backfill with stories? And I mean, tell me a little bit about the process you use and how you come up with just the right story to fill that gap.
You're talking about for a speech specifically?
Or speech specifically.
Yeah. I try to keep to a dialogue with the audience. So like really quickly the hit of the back and forth of that dialogue would be, by the way, these are the beats. This is not how I perform it, right? I got to flesh it out and make it artful and interesting. But the
Yeah,
beats are number one, I need to address that, like, I am here to talk about this goal you have. Because the
right,
first question you're thinking is, how will this help me?
right.
Second question that you think is, aren't I already trying to achieve that goal? And I go, yes, here's what you're doing. And the third question is, why not keep doing it? And I go, well, here are the problems with what you're doing. And then the
Yeah,
fourth question is, what do I do differently? And here's the change I'm here to prescribe. Then the
yeah,
next question is, what does this even look like if I were to do it? Here's my lead story. So the lead story I have slots into like the middle, maybe slightly towards the front of the speech, like the end of the first third, maybe. And then after you're like, okay, Mark, thank you. I see that you have my goals in mind. I see that the way I'm doing it has problems, and I understand the change you're asking me to make and what it looks like, thanks to Mark's story or Sam's story that you told me. The last question is what every expert salivates hearing, which is, how do I do it too? And then you have methodology and tips and supporting narrower stories, right? And then I close with the Sally story or several different options. But
yeah,
so to me, I start with like, what is the argument I'm making in a lawyerly logical case for a change that I think people should make? And then where in that argument do they need to hear a story? Because I am already at letter Z with my ideas, as are we all. And it's so
yeah,
tempting to go, okay, I'm here to teach you A, B, elemental P, X, Y, Z. And people go, huh? What? Huh? Like
Right.
you need to
Right.
dole it out in the right order too, so that they get what you get.
Yeah, and we'll have to wind up here. We're coming close to the end of our time, but I think that's also an important point. The biggest mistake I made when I started to become a speaker was that I still thought I was a teacher. I thought my goal was to like do a data dump of information and teach them everything. But really, the best you can hope for, I think, in a speech is leave them with 3, 4, maybe 5, action plans, and to help solidify these action plans and make them memorable through stories. There has to be an element of entertainment, right? It is if you're a keynote speaker, if you're just starting out, maybe you are, teaching. But as a keynote speaker, there also has to be an element of entertainment. It's not just getting up there and reciting facts and figures and research.
I don't think you can just be a fact and figure citer, click, 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 click anywhere, right? Like being
Yeah,
a
right.
storyteller serves others better everywhere. And so therefore it serves you better everywhere. Like what is the role of the storyteller today? Like everyone is trying to be a leader in their space, a leader to their team, a leader to their audience or customers. A leader's job is to give others what you know they need even before they know why they'd want it, right? That's what makes you a leader. And a storyteller's job is to prepare those people to receive that wisdom. In other words, if you're giving them something you know they need, then your job as a storyteller is to show them why they'd care. And then into that open possibility goes your thinking, your prescription, your product.
Well said. Well said. And that's a great positive trajectory to end our episode with. So, Jay, this has been a lot of fun. We'll have to do more of this storytelling together in the future because this was a great show. I learned a lot from you. Thank you so much, and thanks to everyone listening around the world. We sure appreciate you. We never take you for granted on the Marketing Companion, and we will see you next time.